West Yorkshire, England, looks very much like one might expect. Wide open expanses of boggy grasslands, a harsh yet oddly beautiful landscape of low hills and shallow valleys, littered with outcrops of rock and odd thickets of trees and wild brush. It is an eerie place, steeped in mystery and obscurity. It has been said that Ilkley Moor can scare you to death during daylight, and at night it's far worse, especially in winter when the northern fogs descend. Situated between the towns of Ilkley in the north and Keighley to the south, the moor is home to many myths and legends. There are countless boulders and large rock formations with strange markings carved into them, some of which are said to date back more than 10,000 years. Over the centuries, locals in the outlying settlements have described all sorts of bizarre phenomena, from weird lights in the sky to reports of strange creatures roaming the moorlands. And one of these encounters, which took place during the 1980s, would go on to make international headlines. The story begins at 7 AM on the morning of December the 1st, 1987, when Philip Spencer, an off-duty policeman, set off across the moor on foot towards his father-in-law's house, which was in one of the neighbouring villages. Under normal circumstances, he would not have taken this route. The prospect of walking through the moors in the dark was an unappealing one, to say the least. But it was a relative shortcut, much quicker than walking the perimeter roads. And as an amateur photographer, Spencer had hoped to capture some of the odd light anomalies caused by the rising sun hitting the early morning mists, which the moors were famous for. So he had taken his camera with him. They're roughly 40 square mile size, coupled with the thick fog and high winds. The moors can be unforgiving at the best of times, and it's all too easy for someone to lose their way whilst hiking across them. So as a precautionary measure, Spencer also packed his compass. It was a cold morning, and the frosty ground crunched underfoot as he stepped out onto the grasslands. A chance passerby might well have seen his dark silhouette fading away into the darkness of the thick fog, and thought one of two things. Either he was a very brave man, or completely mad. Despite Spencer's own reservations, the walk was uneventful, and in actual fact, rather pleasant. But at some point during his journey, he noticed that the day had suddenly dawned. which struck him as odd, because he didn't recall seeing the sun rise over the eastern horizon. He didn't dwell on this too much, as he had just reached a small coppice and was getting ready to take some photographs, when a slight movement to his right caught his attention and caused him to turn his head, and the image of what he saw standing there would stay with him for the rest of his life. No more than 50 meters away, on the slight incline of an escarpment, stood a small greyish figure, roughly 4 feet in height. At first glance, and in the low light, he thought he was looking at a young child in a costume. But as his eyes adjusted, it became quite obvious that the small figure was not human in the slightest, or an animal for that matter. In fact, it was like nothing he had ever seen before. Its head was abnormally large, and it had big, black, almond-shaped eyes. It was gesturing with one of its hands, as if to say, "Do not come any closer." Spencer was nonplussed, but after his initial shock had subsided, he raised his camera and managed to snap a single photo of the strange creature just before it turned and retreated the rest of the way up the escarpment. Although some way behind, he hurried after it and got to the top of the rise just in time to see a dome-shaped saucer shooting off into the sky at phenomenal speed. So fast, in fact, that he didn't have time to take another picture. Spencer stood in silence, looking up at the dark clouds, dumbfounded by what he had just witnessed. When he finally came to his senses, he scanned his surroundings for any clues that might explain what had just happened, but found nothing. There was no sign whatsoever of the creature or the strange craft ever having been there. Feeling somewhat disorientated, he took out his compass to get a bearing on his location. Whilst he was sure he was facing north, the needle was oddly pointing south. Fortunately, he knew the moors quite well, and thinking that the compass may be faulty, decided to disregard its reading altogether and go with his gut instinct. Continuing on his journey, he eventually reached his father-in-law's village, which confirmed that a few other anomalies became apparent when Spencer checked the time on the village clock. It indicated that it was just after 10 AM, at which point he remembered thinking earlier on that it was much lighter than it should have been. His walk across the moor should have taken no more than an hour, yet he had started out at 7 AM and had arrived at his destination just after 10, which meant that In reality, it had taken him a full 3 hours. Even with his stopping to take photographs, this should not have been the case. He now realised that either he had set out later than he had thought, or he was in fact missing time, the prospect of which he found unsettling, given what he had just witnessed. Remembering the picture he had taken, he managed to get the film from his camera developed within 24 hours, and upon examining the shots, he discovered that he had indeed captured an entity of some description on film, although the image quality was fairly poor. Despite this, he knew he had something of importance, and through the proper channels, he was able to contact a UFO investigator by the name of Peter Howe. During their initial telephone conversation, Howe was skeptical of Spencer's account, thinking that the story sounded far too good to be true. However, upon meeting and interviewing Spencer, and after viewing the accompanying photograph, he was convinced that he was dealing with a man of integrity, and that the case was genuine. Howe's next step was to have the photograph analysed by a number of specialists. It was first sent to a wildlife photography expert, who confirmed that the creature in the image, if it was a creature at all, did not match the description of any wild or domestic animal local to the area. If anything, it appeared more humanoid in shape. The next stage was to send the image and its negatives to Kodak Laboratories in Hemel Hempstead, where analysis confirmed that whatever had been captured on film was indeed part of the original photograph and not superimposed. Finally, the image was sent to the United States for computer enhancement and further examination. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, an optical physicist for the United States Navy, expressed his opinion, concluding that the slow shutter speed used for low light conditions made the film far too grainy for proper analysis. He closed his investigation, stating, "I had great hopes that this case would prove definitive. Sadly, circumstances prevent it from being so." Somewhat indifferent to Maccabee's comments, Howe turned his attention to other aspects of the case, such as the compass and the scene where the encounter had allegedly taken place. Both were examined by a local university, and neither was found to exhibit any signs of radiation. However, it was confirmed that the polarity of the compass needle had been reversed, suggesting that it had been subjected to a strong magnetic field at some point in time. With that, the investigation was effectively drawn to a close. Over the next few months, Spencer began to have strange dreams, and as a result, became deeply troubled by the missing time he had experienced. Howe suggested that he undergo regressive hypnosis as soon as possible. They contacted Dr. Jim Singleton, who agreed to conduct the session on the 16th of March, 1988. Under hypnosis, Spencer described an extraordinary encounter, saying that he had been walking along the moor when he had suddenly spotted the strange creature just ahead of him. It was said to have been around 4 foot tall, with a large head and dark eyes, and greyish-green skin. It had unusually long arms, but short legs, which appeared thin, almost as if they were in a state of atrophy. One of its most striking features was its exceptionally large hands. Spencer was astonished when the entity began to approach him, and found that he was stuck to the spot, unable to move. He then recalled floating in a horizontal position, no more than 2 feet above the ground, as the creature walked ahead of him, pulling him along as a child would a helium balloon. They finally reached a strange craft at the top of an escarpment, at which point he blacked out. Upon waking, he found himself in a bright round room, where a voice told him not to panic. He discovered that he was able to move freely, but remained still as he was examined by 3 more entities similar to the one he had encountered earlier. He was then shown 2 films, one which depicted mankind's continual destruction of the planet through war, pollution, and other means. The second film, however, remains a mystery, as Spence was instructed by his captors never to talk about it, and he has since refused to do so, even under hypnosis. Afterwards, the voice asked him if he understood what he had been shown, which he acknowledged with a nod, before blacking out again and finding himself back on the moor. A small movement to his right caused him to turn his head, and that's when he saw and photographed the small humanoid figure. Although at that exact moment, he did not recall his aforementioned abduction, or ever having seen the entity before. So what did Spencer photograph that day? Is there any truth to his tale? At least as far as the image is concerned, it can't be debunked, for the same reasons it can't be given as proof. The image quality is unfortunately just not good enough. Whilst it could well be a genuine picture of an extraterrestrial entity, it could just as easily be a bush of some kind, or even a mannequin. Some years later, another investigator visited the scene of the encounter and photographed himself at the same distance and location in order to get a sense of scale. This demonstrated that whatever it was had been around the height reported by Spencer, Furthermore, there was no bush or hedge in the exact spot where it had been stood, somewhat ruling out the possibility that the anomaly was part of the foliage. Skeptics have been quick to dismiss the case as a hoax, as indeed it wouldn't have been too hard to perpetuate. One thing they have frequently pointed out is the awkward angle at which the figure appears to be standing, almost as if it is being propped up in some way, as a mannequin would need to be. Secondly, the compass could easily have been tampered with before Spencer even set out on his walk. And finally, particular attention has been drawn to how apparently absurd Spencer's abduction experience sounds. For instance, why would beings of a higher intelligence show him, of all people, a simple policeman with no power whatsoever to do anything about mankind's wider problems, a film about our gradual destruction of the planet? However, skeptics are no more qualified to speculate on the thought processes of extraterrestrial beings than anyone else. Who knows the ways in which they may think? And one undeniable fact of the case is that Spencer has remained steadfast regarding the details of his story. He seemed a very genuine individual who sought little to no financial gain from his experience. One has to question then what his motives would have been behind propagating such a hoax, especially as the name Philip Spencer is actually a pseudonym and his real name remains unknown. So it is quite evident that he has not sought fame either. The community's opinion on the photograph and the alleged alien abduction experience remains split. Believers will see what they want to see, and skeptics will see nothing at all. Ultimately, it all depends on one's mindset, and for that reason, the case remains wide open to debate.